Good morning, everybody. Top of the morning. We have a couple more seats if you guys want to sit down. No. Well, cheers. Let's raise our glasses. I'm so glad that you all would take the time to come out on a Saturday morning, 9 months before an election, and talk about the issues of the day. I'm grateful. You know, any of you go to caucuses? You know that. Thank you. That's awesome. You know, when I was working my way around the rooms at my caucus site, I'd ask the question, how many first-timers in the room? And about a third to a half the room each time, first-timers, which to me is the best sign for optimism and hopefulness. You know, we got a wake-up call, as I'll talk about. We got a wake-up call in November of 16, and to me, it was not that election itself that would change the course of the country. It's what we did about that election itself that will change the course of the country. And what I'm seeing and feeling and observing gives me great hopefulness, great hope and great optimism about what's ahead. So thank you, and that's all because of you. I thought I would some of you are familiar faces, some of you are new friends. I would love to tell you about me, a little about my story and why I'm doing this. Tell you a little about what I've learned in the last 10 months of campaigning. And then most importantly, I want to hear from you. I believe the foremost responsibility of representation is to listen, something that our current representative doesn't do so well. And not only am I antithetical to that approach, that's what I love. You know, when you represent people, you know, how can you do so without visiting with them? And how can you represent an entire district when you only want to represent half of them? I don't want to be the Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I want to represent an entire district. And that requires that I spend time with everybody, not just Democrats, but libertarians and Republicans. And I've learned a lot, and I'm going to share that with you, and I encourage you to challenge me and share what's on your mind too. Strangely enough, I was born on Richard Nixon's inauguration day. Which, maybe that's all I need to say. January 20th, 1969, my parents, Artie and Dee Dee, met at Central High School in St. Paul in the early 1960s. Artie had been raised by my grandma Ruth, who was a single mother in St. Paul. She worked at Kohl's department store in the Highland Village and selling boys' suits to make ends meet. And Artie went to the University of Minnesota on an ROTC scholarship, because he couldn't afford school. And was deployed to Vietnam as a captain in the U.S. Army about 6 months before I was born, and was killed in action when I was 6 months old in July of '69. And my mom was 24 and she was widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents for the first 3 years of my life. And in an extraordinary blessing for me, my mom remarried when I was 3 years old, Eddie Phillips, who adopted me, and into a remarkable family. Some of you might be familiar with it. Great business success and achievement and philanthropy and wonderful principles. And then we ended up moving to Edina after I was adopted. And I remember as a little boy visiting my adopted grandma, who was actually the advice columnist, Dear Abby. Some of you might know that. I see some smiles. I'm not here to give you advice. That was the best advice she gave me was to don't give too much advice. But I would visit her in a beautiful home in Los Angeles, and I'd visit my grandma Ruth in a public housing development in St. Paul. And that disparity really troubled me as a young boy. I couldn't describe it at the time, but I surely can now. And in no small way illuminates what I'm doing right now, running for Congress. I've lived that fine line between advantage and disadvantage, and that's what inspires me. So when we moved to Edina, I went to school right here, Edina Highlands, right across the way. In fact, I used to ride my bike here every single day to Jerry's, buy baseball cards at the pharmacy, and hang out with my crew right down the street. So this is kind of a homecoming. Went to Edina Highlands, I went to Walnut Ridge Park where I learned how to play hockey. And I was raised in a family that valued hard work. It taught me to judge people by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And that most importantly, that success isn't to be measured by how much we collect, rather by how much we share. And I worked hard as a kid. I bussed tables at Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. In fact, on weekends, Sunday mornings to be specific, my job was to get up on a ladder and clean all the picture frames at Runyon's. There were about 120 of them, I think. And I did so on Sunday mornings, of course, because the bar was still closed, and I did so every week. And I'll tell you, if there's ever a way to teach young people not to smoke cigarettes, they should get on a ladder and clean bar frame. Sincerely, every Sunday I did that, and every Sunday you'd be appalled at what you took out of those glass frames, and it was quite a lesson for me. I opened a mobile car wash service, worked in our family's print shop for a couple of years, and was very much inspired by an extraordinary family. I went to school out east, Brown University. Graduated, came back home because I love home, and worked at a small startup company here in Edina for a couple of years before joining our family business. My first job was in our warehouse picking orders, and I worked in our production department for a couple of years as well. If any of you had a bad batch of Phillips peppermint schnapps in the spring of 1993, I apologize. I'm still doing it out. And on the weekends, I went to the University of Minnesota, pursued my MBA, and worked my way up the ladder and eventually led the company. And I grew up in a family that taught me in business that it's a means to an end. And the end is taking great care of employees and the communities in which we do business. And that's what we did at Phillips. In fact, my great-grandfather, Jay, put together what is recognized as one of the country's very first employee profit-sharing plans that I keep on my desk from 1941. And we employ those principles. We did so at Talenti Gelato, in which my father invested shortly before he died in 2011, which we sold to Unilever. Anybody like Talenti? Yay! Yeah. What flavor? All. That's what I like. We sold that to Unilever a couple years ago, and now I own a couple coffee shops, Pennies. One not far away from here in Linden Hills, and one in downtown Minneapolis. And I'm trying to put those same principles into place. We pay a $15 minimum wage to everybody at Pennies, plus tips, so most make over 20, which is about double that of just about any other coffee shop in town. And we do so not because it's easy, because it's not, it's hard. And we do so not because it's mandatory, it's not, but it's the right thing to do. And during this campaign, I've come to realize that policy is hard to change in this country. We have a system designed to prevent change from happening easily, and we see that every day. And I've come to realize it's the decisions that we all make, every single one of you in the room, the decisions you make every day, where you spend your time, with who you help, and where you spend your money, perhaps has even a more profound effect on the outcomes of other people's lives than anything. And Pennies is an example of a way of expressing that belief that if you take good care of people, we'll all do better, as Paul Wellstone said, if we all do better. Turning up the clock to November of 16, I'm the father of two teenage daughters, Daniela and Pia, 19 and 17 years old. And we watched the election returns that night. And I would imagine, like many of you, I was dismayed. I was dumbfounded, shocked, and deeply concerned by the outcome of that election. And I went to sleep troubled. I woke up even more so, and sat at the breakfast table with my daughters, and that morning I made a promise. I said I would not complain. I would convert that anxiety into action, and the way to do so would be public service. And I turned my attention to Eric Paulson. And I'll tell you, it didn't take long for me to recognize that this is a representative who misrepresents himself. He talks like Jim Ramstad, and he votes like Michelle Bachmann. And if Jim Ramstad, frankly, was still our congressman in the 3rd District, I wouldn't be running, because he was a statesman. He worked together. In fact, he and Paul Wellstone worked closely together. And Jim Ramstad's mental health work, mental health parity, I think, is one of the most important bits of legislation in recent memory. And he's a reason for that. So that's kind of a little bit of what concerned me. And I thought to myself, the Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump, but it did not anticipate a Congress filled with so many who lack courage. And Eric Paulson is the poster child for that. I don't think a bad man, but someone who has been corrupted by a system that promotes corruption, represents party over principle, and that has to change. And it's not unique to Eric Paulson, and it's not unique to one party or the other. Both parties have some ownership in this. And I determined that I'm going to do something about it, and the way to do so is to run for Congress. And this is the time, because if we don't stand up, and if we don't say enough, and if we don't participate, thank goodness we live in a country where we can do something about this before it's too late. And democracy needs to be tended to. And that's why I'm so thrilled all of you are here. That's why I'm so thrilled so many hands went up about who went to caucuses, because that's the essence of participation, the essence of democracy. And that's why I am more hopeful now than I've ever been. I started this campaign out of concern, and that has now transitioned to optimism. And I see how we can get things done. And I do so by talking to people. You see, some of you might be wearing my little sticker of my truck, my government repair truck, my 1960 International Harvester. 1960 because that's the last year a Democrat served in the seat. And I bring it around the district and I serve coffee and have conversations with people. My truck doesn't say what party I represent. My truck invites people to come say hi, coffee and conversation. And I hear, you can imagine some of the stories I hear, the people I meet, the perspectives that are shared with me. But I've come to recognize that if you afford people the chance to simply have a conversation in a thoughtful, respectful manner, you can accomplish a lot, a lot. And I think we have a responsibility to remember that and start extending invitations to people who see things differently. Because I've come to the conclusion that there is a lot less that separates us than you might believe. Most people I speak with, and I mean overwhelming majority, want the same things. They want safe streets and to feel safe in our country, and they want stronger public education, want better access to quality health care at a lower cost, they want cleaner water, cleaner air. I mean, the outcomes we all desire. So the separation is something that I see a great opportunity to start mending. And so when I call this my government repair truck, it's not just repairing government, it's literally repairing people. And that's the overarching mission and mandate of this campaign. And I can only do so much. And that's why I make the appeal to you to extend those same invitations to other people. And I want to tell you a little about what I've learned on the campaign trail about issues, and then I want to turn it over to you. I'm going to say no matter what your number one issue is, and everybody in this room has one of great importance, if not many, but whatever your number one issue is, I ask you to make campaign finance reform your number two issue. Because I have discovered, from years of investing in candidates, and now a candidate myself, I can tell you how unbelievably corrupting our campaign finance system is. Americans like to believe we are the most ethical, principled people on the planet. And I would argue in most cases we are. But when it comes to campaign finance, we are not. Because we have legalized corruption. That's the difference. We're not principled. We have legalized corruption. Both parties. And we perpetuate it, we encourage it, we promote it, and it has got to change. There are only 6 members of Congress out of 535 men and women. Only 6 refuse to accept PAC money, special interest money, and federal lobbyist money. And should I win, I would be the 7th member of Congress out of 535 that don't, because I refuse all those dollars. Not because it's easy again. It's hard. The slope is a lot steeper when you refuse all those dollars, because that's how campaigns are financed today. That's why Eric Paulson has been the beneficiary of almost $8 million from these interests in just 10 years. If we don't affect that, everybody, if we do not reduce the influence of affluence, we are in grave danger, and much more so than any president of this country could ever put us in. So I ask you this. I'm compelled to elevate this issue. The answers aren't easy because of, and as many of you know, that Citizens United made things awfully complicated. It was a very destructive decision that has allowed entities like the Koch brothers, who, as some of you might know, that they just announced intentions to spend $400 million between now and November. $400 million. And of course, there are Democrats that do the same thing, Tom Steyer and others. If you think that's how things should work in this country, by all means, vote for people like Eric Paulson. But if you think things need to change, let's find candidates like myself, and more than that, a lot more others, that recognize that we cannot do anything until we affect this change. And I call for a few things. Transparency, because I think we deserve to know where money comes from. Only half of what will be spent in this campaign is money that will be spent by the campaigns themselves. Most of the dollars don't even come from here. They come from interests and entities all around the country that have no interest in our interests. And that's the truth. So transparency. I think it's time that we try again to cap expenditures in campaigns. We already cap investment. All of you can only give $5,400 to me today. We cap how much you can invest in a campaign, but we do not cap how much you can spend. As a result, the race in the 3rd district, whether I'm the DFL endorsed candidate or someone else taking on Eric Paulson, it will probably be a $20 to $25 million race. You can imagine that. Just as a comparison, up in Canada, a race for Parliament, an MP's race in Parliament, is capped at about $180,000 Canadian for both sides. $180,000. Much shorter cycles. You're not perpetually raising money. And it takes away the mean-spirited, nonsensical, constant advertising that is so destructive, in my estimation. But most of all, it's not just the money, it's the time. If you knew how much time candidates and elected officials spent dialing for dollars, they call it, 3 hours a day walking across the street on Capitol Hill to small conference rooms where you get on the phone, you call people and interests and lobbyists for money. And do you think they call and ask you for $5? No, that's a waste of time. They ask you for $5,000. That's who they call, and that's who they spend their time with. Country clubs, boardrooms, beautiful living rooms. That's where a lot of this work gets done. As a result, we have a whole generations of American voters who are completely disenfranchised. Candidates don't visit them, they don't call on them, they don't listen to them, and the result is you have a massive change as we had in the last election when we sent down Donald Trump to the White House. Because people are sick and tired of not being heard. So if we reduce the influence of that affluence, candidates have to go back to people, and it's not a relentless pursuit of money, and things can change. I also call for a national voting holiday. I think it's time that we set aside one day a year, where people take the day off, celebrate our freedom to go and vote, and recognize the responsibility. Bring your loved ones and your family, your friends perhaps, your children, your grandchildren, and express upon them how important civic participation is, because if we don't do it, others will, and others do not necessarily share the same values that most of us want to see expressed. And ultimately, I'd like to see the day when you can only send money to a candidate for whom you can vote. Because, as I just expressed, out of a $20 million, $25 million campaign, most of that money will not be coming even from here. And if money equals speech, I believe the people whose speech is the most important are the people that are voting in a specific election. And that's corrupting. I think that's corrupting. So we have to address it. I want to start, I typically don't start with gun violence, but I changed this week. I'm just going to talk about a few more things. Gun violence is such a massive problem, and I'm so sick and tired of expressing thoughts and prayers every time it happens, to be criticized by a handful of people saying this isn't the right time to talk about it. That means there's never a right time. And if you don't want to talk about the students and teachers, 17 people that were just killed in the prime of their lives earlier this week, then let's talk about the Sandy Hook kids, for God's sakes. And I'm a changed person because of this, and I announced my intentions yesterday. The money is why this is all happening, everybody. You know why. You know who they are. And there's an entire party that is in the pockets of these people that will refuse to do anything. And it's just appalling, and I'm really, really frustrated, I'm disappointed, and my goodness, I ask you another favor today, everybody. The likelihood is that the news cycle will change in a couple days, and we will forget about this massacre the same way we've forgotten about another 200 that have happened since Sandy Hook, or thereabouts. And if we don't remember this every single day, I made it a personal intention to do so. I was at Wayzata High School yesterday, just a couple days after this massacre, and I never had given thought to what it's like for students to go to school every day right now, everybody. I felt afraid walking down the halls of a public high school in my backyard in Wayzata. And imagine what it's like to be a teenager. We have, I think, a couple in the room. That's wrong. And if we're not going to look out for our kids in this country, then shame on us. And I encourage you to start elevating this issue and vote for people who are willing to do the right thing from both parties. I don't care if it's Democrats or Republicans. This is not a partisan issue. So gun violence, the beginning, in my estimation, is background checks. Universal background checks on gun purchases. I do believe it's time for an assault weapons ban, that same one we had in place during the Clinton years, when this did not happen. The AR-15 is the culprit in every single one of the most recent massacres, at least most of them. And look at machine guns. Automatic weapons are already illegal in this country, constitutionally so. So my proposition is so should semi-automatic weapons. They are destructive. This is not about taking guns away. I own a gun, everybody. I'm not here to take guns away from people, law-abiding, thoughtful people. It is a protected right in this country. I recognize that. But so is the pursuit of happiness and life. And that's a responsibility. So we have to elevate these things. And we also have to talk about mental health. Because if we don't put mental health professionals in every single school in this country, we are also doing our kids a disservice. And not just for gun violence, for health. And we need anti-bullying programs in every single school, because kids are suffering. And the outcome, we all know. We also need to affect campaign finance reform, because if we don't do that, nothing is going to change, everybody. And you watch. The NRA hasn't even made a statement, and Republican leadership, for the most part, is silence, because that's the playbook. Don't say anything stupid after a massacre. Just wait for the next one and be silent again. So we have to affect that change, and we got to do it every day. And I'm going to be a very, very outspoken proponent of doing so. Healthcare, I want to talk about because we need to afford health care, I believe, to everybody in this country. We are the last developed country in the entire world that chooses not to do so. Let's make the moral choice, everybody, to do so. Let's make the moral choice to do so. How is the question? We can do it. Single payer is one tactic. But I want to see health care for all, and I believe the best way to achieve that isn't to wave the banner of single-payer health care. I think the way to do so is to do the one thing that actually Democrats want, that Republicans might even support, which is to afford choices. And I think we should expand Medicare immediately as an option for everybody in this country, as an option for all. It is a strong program, and furthermore, we should also let Medicare negotiate prescription drug pricing, because if we did so, we would reduce the cost of care. We already allow the VA to do it, but once again, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want Medicare to negotiate drug pricing because prices would drop. And they spent $250 million last year on lobbyists to ensure that doesn't happen. Tens of millions more putting in campaign pockets. You think anything's going to change? No. No. So let's make the choice to start, at least to start in the right direction. Medicare Option, I believe we need to negotiate pharmaceutical pricing. We also need to talk about something that nobody wants to talk about, which is how we deliver care in this country. And as most of you know, only things reimbursed are procedures and hospitalizations. So if you're a health system, the only way to earn any revenue is to put someone in the hospital or to do a procedure on them. Why do we not demand, Republicans and Democrats and everybody else, why do we not demand that the system reimburses for prevention and reimburses for quality? What a fundamental important shift that would be. Not easy, but necessary, because we are continuing to feed the monster in the way we do it right now. And just as a case in point, has anybody had acupuncture in this room? Has it helped? Yeah.
Yes.
Acupuncture has been determined, it doesn't work for everybody, but for a lot of people it does. And it's also been shown in about 80 to 90% of cases to be as effective as opioids for pain relief. But there are almost no insurance plans that reimburse for acupuncture. But every single one of them does for opioids. And the last time I checked, nobody's addicted to acupuncture. And I say that tongue in cheek, but it's true. So why? You wonder why, and the why is always the money, everybody. Acupuncture doesn't have a lobby, right? But the pharmaceutical industry does. I think I'm going to turn it over to you. Healthcare, the environment I want to talk about, women's rights, reproductive rights. We talked about gun violence a little bit, but campaign finance reform is always going to come back to number one for me. But I want to know what's on your minds, and I'll close by sharing a comment my great-grandfather said to me just about every week during his lifetime when I knew him. And he would say, Dean, money is like manure. If you stack it up, it stinks. And if you spread it out, it fertilizes. And as I contemplate the lens through which I view policy and what this country needs to do, it is to be thoughtful. And it is to afford opportunity to more people than we do right now. As a Democrat, I believe in three principles: truth, and justice, and opportunity. And should I be so fortunate to represent you, that is the lens through which I view just about every policy, to ensure that others have a chance, others have opportunities. We cannot guarantee outcomes, but most assuredly we can do better at guaranteeing opportunities. So if you are like-minded, I would be so grateful and honored for your support. This is a family. I'm a candidate, but this is a campaign. And if you want to be part of this, we are going to get this done, and most assuredly we are going to have some fun, because that's who I am. So thank you, everybody.
People into the seats.
Okay.
We have way more people than we thought.
Yeah, everyone. And also, I just want to let you know, now it's your turn to ask questions. I want to introduce Nate. Is filming today. He works on behalf of the Republican Party, the RNCC, is it? Are you?
NRP, yeah.
RNCC, okay, RNCC. And his job is to track me, to film me at events, and of course, they hope that they catch me saying something or doing something that they could use in an advertisement that would make me look foolish. But I just want you to know why he's a good man. Nate's doing his job. Democrats do the same thing to Republican candidates. That's how this industry works. But just to let you know, he is commerce debate. That's about it. His calculus is pretty clear. I'm going to raise a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars, primarily from special interests. I will spend that on television so I can hide behind the big old television screen and propagate an image of myself that is disconnected from truth. But it works. It works, and that's the sad truth about politics right now in this country, is it works. So yeah, my job and my intention is to be antithetical, is to show up as many places in front of many people as I possibly can, to challenge him to do the same, face to face. I relish very few things as much as being on a debate podium with Eric Paulson, as you might imagine. So should I be the candidate, I'm sure there will be at least one debate. I've also guaranteed that I would hold 4 open public town hall meetings, at least 4 every year. Not just because it's a responsibility, because it's actually fun. And how can you do your job if you're not hearing from people, especially the ones who don't agree with you? So I'm a little different than he is. Whether or not we can get him to engage, I don't know. But that's our collective responsibility. And the best way to promote your perspective is to vote in November. Yes?
How do you feel about infrastructure, specifically raising the gas tax or alternative plans like that for raising money that we don't have?
Yeah, so infrastructure, that is one of those intersections that I see as a possible way to work with within the current construct of Congress and even this administration. When I think of first of all, infrastructure is a very broad term, as we all know, and our country is a relative teenager amongst developed countries in the world, and our aging infrastructure is not surprising based on the age of our country. And the investments are important, and the biggest question, of course, is how to finance them. But I'm going to focus on some things that aren't often talked about, such as high-speed rail. Any of you who have traveled the world and know how efficient and easy high-speed rail is, you probably share my perspective that how can we in the United States of America, the most developed, prosperous, extraordinary country in the world, how can we be the one country that lacks such high-speed rail? Furthermore, if there are any environmentalists in the room, you'll be pleased to know that high-speed rail saves extraordinary amounts of carbon. It's more efficient, it's easier, and it's much better on the environment. So when I think about infrastructure, I think I'm going to be a very strong advocate for high-speed rail. Not to mention, there's going to be a lot of job displacement over the next couple of decades as we transfer to new technologies, self-driving cars, and so forth. We need to create new opportunities for people. And infrastructure investments, in my estimation, are the most extraordinary way to do so. High-speed rail, of course, I don't want to see increasing investments just in roads, because in my estimation, we're just a few years away from the transition to self-driving cars, autonomous trucks. I don't think the future is in a whole lot more roads, is my perspective. I think the future is in more mass transit, more transit that's more favorable to the environment, and so forth. So how to pay for it? It's an awfully difficult question. You talk about a gas tax. I happen to drive an electric car. So anybody who drives an electric car right now is not paying a gas tax, right? The future is not fossil fuels, everybody. The future is renewables and probably electric cars. That's the future. How quickly, that's another question. But we need sustainable sources of revenue. I think an infrastructure bill would be a great stimulus to this country. One reason I favored the corporate tax reduction was that there's going to be a massive inflow of repatriated dollars that in theory will be a stimulus as well and might actually provide the basis for some of these investments. So I don't have an answer to how, but I do want you to know how my principles and values dictate these investments.
Following that up, in terms of paying for it, the issue with Trump's budget that he just proposed is this whole, we put in $200 billion paying stuff and we hope we get $1 trillion of private industry paying for it. The general question is, do we want private industry paying for any part of our infrastructure? I mean, I get that if the federal government doesn't have enough money to build high-speed rail and all these things, where does it come from except private, business or whatever, but do you think it's a good or bad thing to have infrastructure paid for and potentially owned by private businesses? Will there be toll roads? Will rates for high-speed rail go up because someone's making a profit off it?
Yeah, I believe that our government has some core responsibilities. I do think our government oftentimes tries to do too much that can actually be done by the private sector, in some cases better. This is not one of them. I believe these investments are public investments. But, that's indeed what they're designed for. Even if you do not drive on roads, anybody who purchases anything whatsoever, that good is transferred to you via the road. So that is for the public good. And in fact, I'm pleased in Minnesota we don't have toll roads. Anybody who's driven to Chicago knows what a giant, and through the East Coast, it's, you know, what a giant pain that is, right? I think there are better ways to do so. I understand, you know, I do think the private sector can play a role in infrastructure investment, and but I think this needs to be a public initiative. And at the end of the day, we do need to generate resources to ensure that the things that we do entrust government to do, government does well. And I think we have to prioritize those things. And I think infrastructure investments are foremost amongst those priorities. There are some examples of the private sector managing some, if you will, public infrastructure projects well, but I don't think that's the role of the private sector in this case. I think it's the role of the public sector.
With some of the really forward-thinking measures like light rail, thinking about the environment, I worry a little bit about how that reaches people who aren't there yet in terms of their vision. So I'm with you. I want what it's going to look like 30 years from now. But I'm wondering about somebody who maybe their day-to-day is a little different than mine. Maybe their nuts and bolts of how they are able to pay for things by the end of the day is a much more black and white than mine is. And maybe they're at a point where they can't see shifting their life at their, let's say, their age or at their status or at their economic burden. And so I worry about if we're so visionary, how to sort of bring people to that point or find common ground where it may not seem like the reality. For example, we talk about light rail here in town. You know, for this district, that makes total sense. I know that's where you're running. But in terms of larger appeal or thinking about people in small towns who are following you or who are interested in your running, I wonder about if that feels so abstract to them.
Sure.
For their, do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
And how to sort of find that common ground that's sooner, earlier, now for them as well.
Yeah, and so, you know, the question, I think that at the heart of your question, the answer to the heart of your question is our collective responsibility to recognize how our lives as individuals are so dissimilar from those of other thoughtful, compassionate, great people who live very differently. And there's a significant urban and rural divide in this country that's getting even worse, and that we have to recognize. We have to recognize. And I have a much more profound appreciation as I now listen to people throughout this district, some of which is a little bit more urban, some suburban, and some kind of rural. Perspectives are entirely different. Everything on the issue to firearms, to transportation, to taxation, to public safety, schooling. I mean, these are all issues. And if you don't, first of all, we're very fortunate to live where we live in a time in which we live. Despite that, there are people who live in this state who lack access to some of the most important services that we all probably take for granted. So I think we have a communal responsibility to recognize that not everybody sees the same things we do, not everybody lives the same way we do, not everybody's as fortunate as one another. And I believe government should be in the business of thoughtful, compassionate policy that provides incentives to do what is in the best interest of our respective communities and country. And we need more leaders, I think, who are willing to do what I'm doing, which is to not just represent the people that support him or her, but rather to go out and listen. And it often changes one's perspective by 180 degrees. And I would argue that's why the blessing of the Trump presidency, if you ask me, is people like me saying, wow, there's a responsibility to say something, I've missed something. And I have. I think a lot of us in this room have. And we have a responsibility to start listening to people who have been unheard. The message that they sent was, this is not right. And that's why we're going to send this person to the White House who's going to disrupt, and that's what he's doing. So this all ties together in a big package, and it all comes down to us recognizing that people have different perspectives, and we have to be respectful in acknowledging those perspectives. That's the only way we're going to make progress on any issue that we're talking about. Yes.
I understood what you said several minutes ago about a comment about that you supported the corporate tax cuts. We diverged on that.
I respect that.
Yeah. Anyway, but within that context, how would you address what certainly is my concern, the growing inequality in income in the United States? If we're going to give corporations $1 trillion,
Well, that's what I didn't say, what I said is I supported the corporate tax rate reduction because I think it's important in this country to have a corporate tax rate that's competitive with the rest of the world. We've seen a significant outflow of both jobs, headquarters, and some really, and corporate headquarters jobs and factories. And I think that the repatriation of hundreds of billions of dollars that are kept overseas is actually a great stimulus for the country. We've already seen some companies, many of them, announcing increases in minimum wages and bonuses and the like. What I didn't say is that I had argued vehemently for an equally robust middle income tax cut or benefit, which is not part of this package. And that was the promise, and I'm really disappointed by that, because both could have been achieved, if you ask me. The elimination of essentially the elimination of the estate tax was abhorrent in my estimation. Wrong. And there are some parts of that bill, in a nutshell, there are some parts of that bill that I really do support. It did not provide what I consider to be the most important, which is benefits to the middle class in America. And I say that also as a small business owner, because if more people had more money, not just the wealthiest, but more people had more money, it might be a couple more cups of coffee a week at my coffee shops. Might go to Valley Fair a couple more times during the summer, might go to Target and buy some more clothes over the course of the year. That's how all the boats are raised. And this bill, in my estimation, does not accomplish that. And I think all of you have to know, if you don't know already, that it is a great detriment if you live in the 3rd District. This tax bill, comprehensively and collectively, is a negative, which is why 12 of Eric Paulson's Republican colleagues in the House voted against this bill. They were from states just like ours, high tax states. New York, New Jersey, California, to name a few. And yet our Republican delegation voted for the bill. I believe, because Republican leadership said, we need you. You need to vote for this bill, and then we're going to open a campaign, Congressional Leadership Fund campaign office for you, Eric Paulson, and we're going to finance your campaign as long as you go along with the flow. But the fact of the matter is, it was a bad vote. It hurts us, and there's going to be an outflow, even more outflow of our tax dollars to Washington that we'll never see again. That's another truth. So, and you talk about income inequality. I close my opening remarks by reminding you of the lesson my great-grandfather taught me, which is this notion of just collecting wealth doesn't serve. Spreading it out is a great service. Government can play a small role in that, I believe, by the appropriate incentives and tax policy. And we can play a big role in that. That's what I was trying to express upon people. I'm a Democrat, and I recognize what role government can play, surely. But I also need to encourage and remind you and invite you to start thinking about how you spend your own dollars. Because if we want to affect change and help other people, let's support small businesses, you know? It doesn't mean exclusively so, but when you can, go eat at an interesting little ethnic restaurant that's owned by a family that's trying to get a start in this country, right? Go to a local hardware store, support these local businesses. That's the best way that we can take it upon our own hands, because Congress doesn't do anything right now. So I'm going to try to argue both. Let's have thoughtful policy, but let's all of us resolve to affect the change that I know we can change by our own habits. And I think that's what we can do a whole lot better if we collectively decide to make that decision.
How do you reconcile the tax cuts that are favorable to corporations and even middle-income people with the deficit that it's created?
Yes.
And then the fact that
You've
you
got to have people stand up so we can.
I'm sorry.
Oh, here? Okay. I'll repeat the question, too. Yeah, I'll do a better job of that.
And then obviously when you have such a
No, actually,
deficit, the government has to put out more debt.
Sure.
And how do you reconcile that?
So the question is about the additional debt caused by, and the deficit that's going to be caused by this tax bill, which by most objective independent estimates are between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion if things go pretty good.
And now with the infrastructure.
And now that's going to be even another massive.
Right.
So I'm going to answer this in two ways. First and foremost, so that everybody recognizes that Eric Paulson has violated 3 core tenets of Republican principles. He's someone who, for 30 years in his career, has always argued against increasing deficits, and he just voted on the most significant increase that this country's ever known, as far as I know, on this tax bill. He's also voted to allow concealed and carry reciprocity, which, for those of you who have been following the gun violence issue, will know that that essentially violates states' rights, which is a core tenet of Republican principles, right? Why should we in Minnesota that have relatively robust conceal and carry permitting requirements, why should we be subject to Wyoming's laws? It's a foundational question. That's another one. Third is privacy. Eric Paulson has voted to relax the FCC's ability to regulate, well, net neutrality, for one, and then secondly, as some of you might know, ISPs can now buy our internet browsing searches because of votes that he's taken. So there's this massive violation of these principles. The debt and deficit is deeply troublesome because it's easy to use a credit card. Everybody in this room knows. And this administration and this Congress just used our national credit card in ways that confound me. Only to be added to, I think, by this infrastructure bill and this budget. And look at when interest rates are low, you know, we're not going to notice much of a change. But anybody who's lived through the 1980s knows that can change dramatically. And if interest rates spike and it starts consuming a disproportionate amount of our federal budget, a lot changes. Doesn't necessarily put us out of business, but it makes even less and less money available for the things that are really important for us. So I'm deeply troubled by that. And this tax bill, as I said, I do think we need corporate tax. I think it needs to be competitive. But I don't think that, as the result was, that it was just basically a massive handout to the wealthiest. By the way, not the wealthiest in Minnesota, the wealthiest in Texas and Florida. This was a grand, beautifully wrapped package to Republican taxpayers in red states, is what this was. And I'm disgusted by the lack of attention to fiscal discipline and responsibility, and that has to change. Did you have a question, or is it just to repeat the question?
No, I just wanted to
Okay.
hear the.
I'll shout them out. Mark.
As a citizen here in the Congressional District 3, I think we have to remember that to deal with many, if not all of these issues, the first thing that we have to do is to elect a representative to Congress who will actually deal with them. So my opinion is that here in Congressional District 3, what are we going to do to flip the 60,000 some voters that voted for Eric Paulson over the previous candidate in Congressional District 3? That is our challenge collectively. And what are we going to do to make that happen?
Hear, hear. I don't need to repeat that, I don't think. let me just a couple announcements on this subject, okay? This is some really good news. First poll came out about 6 weeks ago, has me up 4 points, head-to-head against Eric Paulson, which is a darn good start. Our campaign has already raised $1.3 million, which is more than any congressional challenger campaign in Minnesota history has raised to date. And that's only from people. We're out raising Eric Paulson almost 2 to 1 from human beings, if you can imagine that. Okay. And I've only been at this for 10 months. We've got hundreds of volunteers, the most extraordinary. Where's my campaign staff? Just raise your hands. I've been part of some remarkable organizations over the years. I've played a role in building some of them. I have never been part of a more extraordinary, energetic, smart, passionate, and compassionate organization as this team. I learn from them every day, and we are very well positioned. We've got hundreds of volunteers. We've got the support of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, their Red to Blue program, one of only 18 campaigns around the country that they have identified as the most likely to unseat a sitting Republican, which we haven't done in this district since the 1958 election. So, that's the good news. The bad news is, incumbency is a great benefit in this country. Great benefit. Particularly because, especially when an incumbent is so deeply on the take from special interest groups and lobbyists, and the people that actually go into his office and lobby him are the same ones writing him checks oftentimes. And that works really well if you want to stay in office. So we have a big task ahead of us. But this is a district, as you might know, that also voted for Barack Obama twice, Hillary Clinton by 10 points, Amy Klobuchar by landslide margins. And it's a district that likes to have a check on a presidential administration typically. And I will make a very impassioned argument that in this case, a lot of people voted for Eric Paulson anticipating a Hillary Clinton presidency. All the data indicates that. Now it's flipped. Now it's for real. Donald Trump is our president. And I'm talking with Republicans every single day who are investing in our campaign and committing to helping this campaign because they recognize this administration is the most important one to have a check on in their lifetimes. So a lot of the stars are aligning, but if we take it for granted, we're going to lose. Every single day, everybody in this room, if you care about this, have to extend invitations to people. Forget what their political perspective is. Extend invitations to participate in something that's really, really important. And I'm just a candidate. As I said, this is a campaign. And if we want to do something remarkable and leave a legacy, this is the way to do so. It is not about the party, it's about the principle of participation. Yeah.
Speaking of Amy Klobuchar, one thing I really like about her is that her willingness to reach across the aisle and work with our Republican people, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a two-pronged question. You know, I tend to be really left-leaning myself, but I'm a realist, and you know, like I would love to let all people that went into our country come in, but I recognize that that's not a realistic point of view. So I'm kind of interested in where you stand on immigration.
Sure. Well, so there are two. So the question, you have two parts to the question. One is celebrating the notion of collaboration, and the other is immigration. And you know, I'll tell you, as someone who has spent his entire professional life building businesses, this notion of having in enterprises two perspectives and they're binary is absurd. You know, in my experience, the best ideas come from listening to people on the factory floor, sales reps, people in the warehouse, because that's where ideas are formed, and you don't apply a label to the ideas. A good idea is a good idea. So that's my background. I find it nonsensical and ridiculous that we divide the way we do within all of our legislative systems in this country, from Congress to state houses around the country. So yes, I'm glad that Amy Klobuchar collaborates. That's why she is so popular in this. I think she's the most popular senator in this entire country, because she does that. And that should be the norm, not the exception, if you ask me. You know, I say to a lot of people, we need to meet. Not always in the middle, but we need to meet. That's the beginning point. You know, that moderation is a misnomer, if you ask me. Conversation is the activity. As for immigration, you know, I'm a student of history, and I know my family's history. I've researched it as deeply as I possibly can. I grew up knowing 4 great-grandparents who told me their stories of, in 2 of their cases, coming to this country and what it was like, and what they faced, and the challenges and the struggles. And they told me it's a responsibility of me, and then in turn my children and theirs, to be reminded of that and do everything we can possibly do to make lives more comfortable, accessible, and provide more opportunity to people who are here from other countries. Because that is the American dream. We are largely a nation of immigrants. And the fact that somehow immigrants and immigration has become a political issue is really upsetting to me. And I think we should be a welcoming country. I think we should, that is the American principle. I also believe that when we have 10 to 12 million undocumented people in our country right now, we have a responsibility to afford a path to citizenship. This notion that somehow you could deport that many people, A, pragmatically is impossible, B, humanly it's abhorrent, and C, and this is actually somewhat interesting, C, economically would be terribly detrimental to this country. So all those reasons beg for a way to provide a path to citizenship. I call something redemption. I think there's a responsibility, if you're not documented, to at least go through the process of becoming an American, and perhaps pay into the system the way that we expect anybody who's applying for citizenship should, because we shouldn't disadvantage those who are waiting in line and want to come here from around the world. And dreamers, I mean, children who had no say in this to begin with, we have a particular responsibility for. And the fact that that hasn't been accomplished yet is just beyond belief. There's the laundry list of things that dumbfound me and confound me about congressional inactivity is extraordinary. And that's why I'm running, is because I've had enough of entrusting others who are making lifebloods and careers out of stagnation. So to answer your question, those are my principles and values. And that's, by the way, something that most people in this district agree with. Most agree. We have to find a thoughtful way to get this done and then have enforceable, thoughtful laws in place relative to immigration. And building a wall, by the way, everybody, you talk about where should money come from. If we invest billions of dollars in building a frickin' wall in this country, God help us. And I'm not an obstructionist, I'm just the opposite.
Or parades.
Or military parades. Yeah, no, we laugh, but these are the symbols that deeply trouble me. So those are my thoughts. Yes.
Well, as a member of a teachers union, I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are about unionism in general and the whole idea of being the power of collective bargaining, and especially as a role in helping the middle class.
Thank you. Well, in fact, I'm pleased to say that Edmund just endorsed our campaign this week, along with a number of other unions. And I'll tell you, I wholeheartedly support the right to organize. Collective bargaining is a core component in this country of success. I believe that unions have served an extraordinary purpose in this country. And I will also say, and this is really important that everybody knows, like any other entity, organization, or institution, a well-led one with principles and values, I always support, and that's true in unions. Poorly led ones, and there are examples, of course, I do not support. And when egos get in the way of representing people, that's when I really get troubled. I'm pleased to say that I've been on both sides. I'm a profound supporter of the right to organize, of unionization, and I've also been a business person. And I will be one of the first Democrats who's a business Democrat who doesn't think that being pro-business and pro-labor should be mutually exclusive.
Amen.
Hear, hear, right? So that's how I feel. And since, first of all, I salute you, and I want to let everybody know that I think it's time in this country that we elevate the most important profession in this country, educators. Are there other teachers in the room? Oh, thank you. As I reflect on my blessings, it all starts with my teachers, every single one of them, many of whom are now part of this campaign, and I see randomly appear at events, and it's one of the most gratifying parts of what I'm doing. If we don't elevate both the esteem, compensation, and ensure that young people know the track to become educators, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And I want to be very vocal and a proponent in so doing. So thank you. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. One, how do you reconcile your concerns with environmental degradation out of the decision to drive a big truck on the campaign trail? And two, I know that you haven't really come out about this, but I'm wondering what your stance is on a woman's right to choose what she does.
Okay. Starting with your second, I very much favor a woman's right to choose. I'm a very pro-choice individual and believe it has to be protected and maintained, and it's a constitutional right. As for driving a truck, I drive a Tesla. I drive an electric car as my daily driver. I have a geothermal system at my house. I care about the environment deeply. I'm even investigating how to electrify my truck. The problem is it's very, 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 very expensive, as you can imagine. I would imagine most of you, who in this room drives a car that uses petroleum? So we still live in that era, and I recognize I'd like to transition to electric, automobiles and trucks and everything. But I drive that truck because it is a way to get people to communicate, and there's no electric vehicle, frankly, that I can find that would serve that same purpose in the way that I want to do so. But I recognize your point.
So would your answer be that you can't reconcile the two?
That I can't reconcile what?
Driving the truck and your concerns about environmental degradation?
Well, I am concerned about environmental degradation, terribly concerned, terribly concerned. My point is, I want you to know that that's, my heart lies in protecting and preserving our environment, and I can tell you about all the action steps I'm willing to take too. That truck, which I drive, you can imagine, a little bit every day, but not great distances, is the same kind of that most people drive,
Not to interrupt, but isn't that part of the recent tax thing, is to take away the credits for electric vehicles? And that was something that really upset me about the tax package, which I also received, I don't know if other people did, but a giant color thing from Eric Paulson, with hallelujahs about the tax thing, and it was paid for by taxpayers, and I really took offense. Is that, legal and appropriate?
It's called franking, and that's another benefit of incumbency. It's supposed to be informational mailings, but that's.
But it was all about
nonsense.
Eric.
Yeah.
And it was all about, and then it had a black family, which promoting middle class values for families, and I just thought it was so.
Yeah.
I don't know. False,
you just touched upon something that's important. Production tax credits to provide incentives for electric automobiles, for geothermal systems at homes, and particularly to solar and wind generators. I just had a great visit with the leadership at Excel Energy, and they're making these choices not just out of principle, because out of economics. Thank goodness we have some policy still in place, you know, that it's going to be sunsetted, but is maintained for production tax credits for solar and wind. And it's because of those that these investments have been made, and it's because of those that Excel may well hit 60% renewable energy production by 2030, which is all because of incentives that government, thoughtful incentives that government provides to transition us, to migrate us, not overnight, but over time to do the things that are the best interest of our communities. And I bought an electric car using that tax credit. And that's how you provide incentives to early adopters to invest in these technologies, and then ultimately lower the cost so that everybody can enjoy them. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that with Eric Paulson, who always claims to be such a huge environmental fan of our national parks, but then he votes against, votes against saving our boundary waters from the pipelines and fracking, and how do you feel, what would be your approach?
On environmental policy?
Well, protecting
Or-
our
environment.
national parks and
Yeah.
our waterways.
Yeah, well, you know, the twin metal, or the mining proposition on the boundary waters. You know, I'm not wholeheartedly opposed to mining. We have to all recognize once again, you know, we need metals. So I can't be comprehensively opposed to mining. I am opposed to mining that could degrade our environmental treasures, including the boundary waters. There's no question. You know, as we all live in our daily lives, you know, there are intersections between what we want and what we can do, and environmental policy is no different. You know, we have to I believe in science. I should let everybody know. The fact that science has become a political issue is deeply troublesome to me. I believe in science. I believe that we have thoughtful processes in place to identify and research threats and risks of all of these initiatives, mining and pipelines and the like. And we should let science lead the way. I think we can do so more expeditiously sometimes, which I recognize. But that is a responsibility. And I'll tell you, as I speak with young people about issues, what do you think is most important on their minds? Environment, because none of these other issues matter if we don't take care of things. So the fact that the environment, I will tell you, everybody, is not a political issue in the 3rd District. Republicans bring up the environment to me just as often, using the same terminology and with the same passion that Democrats do, everybody. Conservation. This is a unifying issue. So I will be a very vocal proponent because I recognize that this is something everybody wants, starting with me. Eric Paulson, unfortunately, like so many others in Congress, they have to make 2 calculations when they take these votes. One of which is on the bill itself, one of which is the consequences of doing the right thing. So that's why I ask you all to remember. Go home today after this meeting and Google opensecrets.org, look at where the money comes from, look at who the recipients are, and then look at their votes. And when it comes to the environment, as long as we have vested wealthy interests enriching the pockets of so many of these elected officials and candidates, we will not see policy outcomes that we want. And that is true in the environment and just about everything else we're talking about. Eric Paulson likes to do his ads with him in the canoe in the boundary waters. He has a canoe in his office. I find that to be the most profoundly ironic truth that I've encountered so far. Because the votes simply do not match the talk. And that is true of this man in just about every fashion. Yes?
I'm with you on pollution control and environment, and so I'm with you on all those, but I'm gonna ask about something that's, I've been gerrymandered out of the district. I live in Lannister, and it took me a long time to realize.
Oh, come on back.
I know. And you know, at first I was like, oh good, I get to vote 50,000, and it took me several years to realize, oh, well, little liberal on one side is no longer, you know, in a dynamic voting district. So what are your thoughts?
Well, gerrymandering, you know, there's two, so first of all,
Can you repeat what
yeah,
you
the question is about gerrymandering, and particularly about how, you know, part of Edina Morningside was kind of peeled out of the 3rd and given to the 5th, and you can imagine why. Gerrymandering clearly is a problem in this country, and a couple of recent court cases have agreed with that perspective, and there's some change on the horizon. I think districts should be a nonpartisan construction. The fact that we entrust it to political parties is nonsensical. But because it's in this democracy's best interest to have competitive districts. The 3rd District is one of the very last, everybody, in this country that really does split tickets and is a swing district and is purple. It's competitive, thank goodness. There are too few, though. It's not in this country's best interest to have perpetual Democrats or perpetual Republicans serving these districts. But here's the bigger challenge. And this, again, this goes back to all of us. We tend to live with people who think like us. We tend to congregate with people who think like us. We tend to congregate with people who look like us. These are choices that we all make. So it's going to be harder and harder to create districts that are truly competitive because people self-select. And that's just the truth. So I don't have an answer for it, but I think we have to acknowledge that to some degree it's going to get very difficult without having awfully strange looking districts geographically to have competitive ones. But I think that is a foremost responsibility of those who are tasked with redistricting, to try to make them as competitive as possible and ensure that new candidates have opportunities to elevate and serve, because incumbency is a deep problem in this country. Maybe a couple more questions, and then unfortunately, we're opening our campaign ice shack today. Did I announce that, everybody? Sitting on Lake Minnetonka, Excelsior Bay, filled with some fun memorabilia. It's the government repair shack to complement the government repair truck. I'd love if you all want to come out for conversation, but I got to head out there momentarily, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I moved into the district about 20 years ago from the East Coast, built a house in Eden Prairie. And I really don't know the district. I've seen the population change. I can tell on my own block, you know, the color of skin of owners of the homes have changed. A lot has changed. And I know you've been a student of the district now for some time. What do you see as the way forward to defeat Eric Paulson in this district?
Okay, the way forward to defeat Eric Paulson in this district? You know, I am a student of the history of the district, and going back to Roy Weir was the last Democrat to serve, and then followed by Clark McGregor and Bill Frenzel and Jim Ramstad. You know, I would argue that Frenzel and Ramstad were examples of thoughtful statesmen. You know, people who served the district well, you know, more independent-minded, willing to work with others. And that's the spirit. Forget parties for a second, but that's the spirit of representation that I wish to bring back. You know, I said earlier, and I wasn't joking, Eric Paulson talks like Jim Ramstad.
Yes.
But he votes like Michelle Bachmann. And you can, but in this day and age, you can do that because it is so easy to present an image that is antithetical to who you really are. So I recognize we have a great challenge ahead of us. But the good news is just starting with the things I've already said. The first poll shows me up 4 points over him. There's winds of change brewing. We've got we're so well positioned to get this done. But it doesn't matter how much we spend, how hard I work, if we don't have all of you, or at least most of you, joining this effort. And when I say joining this effort, I wish to represent this district. I hope I can earn the DFL endorsement in April at the convention. Should I not, I hope you will do the same for another candidate. But I also ask that you remember that this district looks at candidates, not parties, and they want people who are not profoundly left or profoundly right. That is the tent I'm trying to build: fiscal responsibility, social inclusion, independent-mindedness. And I'm a passionate Democrat, absolutely passionate Democrat. But the way forward is via invitations. So you ask me how we're going to get this done. Every single day I have these conversations. I'm going to the ice shack. I invite Republicans out because I want to talk. And every time we talk, a connection is formed, and we realize that there's a lot of nonsensical stuff going on right now. And it's our responsibility to change it. We will not be out-hustled. We will not be under-resourced. I will work as hard as I possibly can, day and night, to get this done. But I surely do need all of you, because I don't want the money to drive the outcome. I want people to. And I want this country to wake up after this next election and to recognize the 3rd district in this state was the bellwether for change. And if that excites you and energizes you, I ask you to join this team, because we are an extraordinary family. And I don't want to just win this race. I want to do so in a fashion that is principled. And I want to do so that in a way that will surprise this country and celebrate this district for its choices. Republicans voting for Democrats is a grand possibility this time around for reasons you can surely understand. And this is an opportunity to start healing these divisions and make our way forward. And we can do it, but it's up to you. I want to be your messenger. I want to be your man in this, but it is up to you.
So does that mean on that sheet over there,
That sheet.
you put, I will volunteer?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Look, I like these because I get to, by your questions, I get to hear what's on your mind. But yes, I'm so glad you bring that up. Thank you. All of you who are delegates, I would love it if you might be a delegate for Dean. All of you who might want to volunteer some of your time or treasure, I ask you to sign up on that little sheet. There are lots of fun things we can do. If you have policy ideas, I don't want just door knockers and phone callers and envelope sealers. I want ideas. And I want your inspiration. I want your stories. I want to have fun. And I want to show people again that campaigning in politics is not a dirty word. That is actually a responsibility and a good time. It gets people out together because in this day and age we have too few opportunities to get together. And a campaign is one heck of a fun way to do so. So yes, sign up. If you want to share your time, you want to share your treasure, that would be great too. But this is not a fundraiser. This is a friendraiser. So thank you all very, very much. And I'm going to close and keep reminding everybody of this. The day after that last election, remember how you felt. Okay? And contrast that to how you might feel leaving this room. Because that's what's changed in my life, and I have migrated from anxiety to hopefulness, and there's something going on, everybody, that we are going to look back on and really, really celebrate down the road. So with that, I turn it over to you, and I ask you to go out today, take a look at Open Secrets, invite a friend to a conversation, someone who doesn't feel the same way as you, and let's come back together, and let's take Eric Paulson down in November, because we can bring a different change to Washington than everybody's done before. So thank you all very, very much. And come to the ice shack. I'm going to go to the ice shack. Comes out there.